recording and find my script. Well, welcome to Here's Tom with the Weather. Is there a God? Is there a great genius painter? Or is it, she, he, they, figments of our monkey brain imagination that we just do to feed our meaningless experience? Is Darwin giggling in his grave at the thought of us thinking about consciousness? Are people created in the image of an intervening higher power, or are higher powers created in our imagination? This is Here's Tom with the Weather. I am your temporary host, Joe C. from Rebellion Dogs Radio. Greetings from David G. He's touring America. We have a special guest, Jay Stinnett from Sedona, Arizona. We'll be waxing poetic shortly. Here at Tom, we promote tolerance and empathy for folks who may have a different spiritual practice, may have different beliefs. It's all about live and let live. This is not an AA meeting. It's just a place where people share their experience of their truth, whatever that might be. If you're listening on a podcast, you can visit us live. You can be part of this show at noon Pacific time, 3 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock in Ireland in the UK, 7 a.m. Saturday in Sydney, Australia. Just by going to Zoom meeting ID 882-1549-8348. And if you're listening, we'll be posting, or we have already posted, our podcast page and our YouTube page. If that's all too much to remember, just here's Tom with the weather.org, htwtw.org. Here we're going to riff out on step 3 and step 11, as we've always done, the legacy of Alcoholics Anonymous. A quick message: Here's Tom is always free, and contributions via PayPal can help underwrite the pod costs of Here's Tom for our whatever it costs money to run the website and all that stuff. But if you're on PayPal, you can thank David for Here's Tom at gilwriter@hotmail.co.uk, gilwriter@hotmail.co.uk. Anyway, back to the business at hand. We talk to seekers and gurus, and today we're talking to someone who, not everyone here is in recovery, but Jay has been on the recovery journey since '79. To give you some context, the KTEL record for that year would have included Tragedy by the Bee Gees, Don't Stop Until You Get Enough by Michael Jackson, My Sharona by the Knack, Heartache Tonight by the Eagles, Don't Bring Me Down by ELO, Knockin' on Wood by Amelia Stewart, I Don't Like Mondays by the Boomtown Rats, Another Brick on the Wall, and I'm going to stop there because I'm exhausting myself. So Jay and I don't even know what we're going to talk about. He is the co-creator of the AA History Symposium. He knows a little bit about documentary research, and he has read more letters written by Bill Wilson than anybody I know. He knows more about the Oxford group, from whence we came, than anybody I know. He wrote a book called Loving Sober and does workshops for people in recovery. And he is the curator of the treatment or recovery program at the Sedona Mago Retreat Center. And he was involved, I don't know if you were a consultant, but I remember seeing you in the Bill W. movie. What am I missing there, Jay? Oh, let's unmute the man.
Well, I think really the important thing is to know with all those syllables, what I am is an AA guy.
Fantastic. Let's do the AA way. Let's let people get to know about you. We always want to know the dirt on our guests. It seems to be what people warm up to the most. How did you get here from there?
Well, I was living in my Pinto, which when I take a look at most of the people here, you realize what that is. But for the younger folks, it was a smart car that Ford made for alcoholics in the 70s. And I had my first drink when I was about 11, 12 years old, but I didn't drink like a normal 12-year-old. By I think the great thing that Alcoholics Anonymous has to offer anyone is the ability to self-identify. And so how do I know that I'm alcoholic? Well, take what I do for recreation and see what happens with the rest of the population when they do that sort of behavior. So by the time I'm 16, my idea of a good time was to take a rack of Reds, 3 high-powered Seconal. By the way, for you AA history geeks, Dr. Bob's drug of choice, till he could get to his booze at night. He kept jars of barbiturates behind at his office. So 3 high-powered barbiturates and to wash it down with a quart of Spagnato wine. In 90% of the population, what that produces is a synergistic effect. The brain starts to shut down. People forget how to breathe. They aspirate on their vomit. With me, I'm looking for car keys and to make short-term romantic commitments. Which leads me to the next phase, which is, of course, blackouts. If you've ever woken up with a life form with which you were unfamiliar when you left the house this evening, so by the time I'm 24 years old, I'm unable to care for myself. I don't want people that love me to see me. I'm like a cat. I'm hiding. I'm driving around in this car. I'm stealing alcohol and gasoline, and I know it's going to get worse. And I ended up getting arrested again, and over a vodka rocks after I got out. My dad asked me. He said, "Do you think you have the disease?" And the still small voice inside of me said, "Pay really close attention. He might pay for the lawyer." And so I said, And he said, "I got a guy that I want you to talk to." And so I called this guy up and he said, "Meet me at the Howard Johnson's in Culver City, 7:30 tomorrow morning. Don't have anything to drink. And don't smoke any of that crap either." How did he know? And what happened is that I met this guy and he started talking about himself and talking about himself. Had problems in his life, and then he met Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't have any problems anymore, and la la la. And I'm just sitting there, and I just want to, find a bathtub and a sharp object, and he keeps talking. I mean, it's been like 45 minutes, so I prompt him and I say, "Hey, look, do I need psychiatric treatment, or do I need religion, or do you think treatment would be appropriate?" And he looked at me and he said, "Listen, Trick, if you or your family can get a hold of the $3,000 it's going to take to get you into treatment," he said, "why don't you go out and drink that money up, and when you're done, call AA. They do it for fun or for free." And then he got up and he said, "If you want AA, you're going to have to go after it like you got your drugs and alcohol. It's in the white pages of the phone book, kid. Good luck." And left. And I went home to my grandmother's house and poured myself a big glass full of whiskey, and I called AA and ended up at my first meeting, and I've been an active member ever since.
Very active, it seems. Can you share with me one of the things? Well, can you tell people how we met, your relationship with Ernie Kurtz?
Well, yeah, I was talking to Ernie. Ernie and I were familiar. I would call him about every 3 or 4 months. My enthusiasm was the Oxford group. And so we had a relationship for probably 20 years. And at one point, he said to me when I was talking about Shaberg and I had come up with this idea, the symposium on AA history, he said, "Do you know Joe C?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you should get a hold of him." And so I did. And, we're similarly afflicted on a lot of levels. And at the time, as I recall, you were going through some real challenges in Toronto. And I believe that everybody needs to be able to sit at the table in the fellowship. And so I did my best to strike up a supporting friendship. And then there was the, you were putting on the first Free Thinkers confab in Santa Monica. Was it 5 years ago, 6 years?
2014.
Wow. So, and my sponsor said to me, "I'm going to go to this thing." And I went, "Oh, well, Paul's going, I better show up." And so that's where we met in person, I believe. So, anyway, and we both like to think far too much. So it's been a wonderful association ever since.
It has been. Like, you and I have definitely had different paths. And for those of you who are listening, if you're not familiar with Ernie Kurtz, he wrote a book called Not God, A History of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was actually his thesis argument paper for his history PhD at Harvard. He'd left the seminary, decided, enough of, I'm gotten all I can out of religion, now I'm going to get into history. He's a classic overachiever, if you ask me. And he's written a couple of other books with Catherine Catcham that many people are familiar with, being The Spirituality of Imperfection and Experiencing Spirituality, which are still recommended reading from a lot of sponsors. And yeah, including Jay. And yeah, so he was very sort of influential, and yeah, and I would never have met Jay had it not been for that. And what Jay's referring to, interestingly enough, it was about, and this really comes down to step 3 ideas, step 11 ideas about a higher power. Is AA membership contingent on following the 12 steps exactly as written? Our agnostic atheist group had been, it has been since resolved, but had been removed from the Toronto meeting list because it wasn't AA enough, because we can't change the steps. And we read an interpretation of the steps that was secular. And that is all page 8 news. It's been resolved. You can even search for meetings in the Toronto website for AA under Big Book or women's meetings or young people or secular or anything else now. It's matter of fact, but at the time it was worldwide news in AA about this action they'd taken in Toronto. And so a lot of people were talking. And so while I was having this problem with speaking my truth in my own language and being chastised for it by my family, Alcoholics Anonymous. You and I both got sober somewhat young, and AA is like our family. You had the other side of the experience where you actually had a Bill W-esque white light experience, and sharing that in meetings wasn't what you expected. Would you talk a little bit about that with us?
Well, yeah, well, a couple of things. I think that the most risky time I ever shared that was actually one of the things that I did to try and support you was to create an event here at Mago where you led a couple of retreats for us, and so we were at a confab where there were about 30, I think, secular people that were holding forth and building their group conscience and all that stuff, and everybody had shared, and it was time for me to share, and I was completely 100% different than the rest of the group. So it was a risky moment, to tell my truth there. So I came in on a Wednesday. On a Saturday, I'm sweating bullets, waiting for the meeting to start. A woman comes through with a bun in her hair and a black dress on and seam toes, and she goes, "No, young man, you're new, aren't you? How can you tell?" And she says, "I can tell you the secret of Alcoholics Anonymous in 4 words." "Really? What are they?" "Find God or die." Not that, anything but that. And 42 years later, I can tell you the secret of Alcoholics Anonymous, 4 words: find love and live. But I was so traumatized by that experience that I got a sponsor at the meeting. And I got to work in the steps. I did my first inventory when I was 24 days sober. Did my 5th step when I had 26 days sober, and I got my first sponsee when I was 28 days sober. So I was a fully vested member of AA by the time I had 28 days. Started working my amends, immediately after that. About 5.5 months in, I'm sitting at a meeting, and there was a woman by the name of Liz Lopresti. And she was sharing at the 2+2 meeting at the Westwood Community Church. And she was standing there, and she was a closing speaker. It was maybe a 15-minute talk, maybe 20 minutes at the most. And she was talking about, in the beginning, how alcohol removed everything that makes a human being from her, and that she'd become an animal. And in that moment, the entire room left. And the first thought was, oh, this must be an LSD flashback, but I'd never had an LSD flashback. And my heart said, pay attention. Now, when we speak of these events, we use the language that we learn as children, or what we've read in spiritual literature, so that it always sounds the same. But we only have so many syllables. And what I am going to try to do is to describe the ineffable. Can't do it. And so what happened was, as I was sitting there and in this white, and I knew that every cell in my being was known, and that it was loved, and that there was no judgment associated with it at all. That I was loved completely. There was no, well, I kind of love you because you've done this or haven't done that, or you should be doing this. There was none of that. And so the language that I have to describe it is that I was in the presence of omniscience, of omnipresence, and omnipotence. And as I felt things wash through me, this incredible feeling of love, I had a sense that everything was known as I personally felt known at that moment. That there was no being or part of creation that was not known in the same way. So being the kind of arrogant guy I am, as I came up with a question, I started to form it in my heart about, what about war? And there was a feeling that came over me. It wasn't a direct thing, but it was, don't worry, I got it. I know about, or not I know, it is all known. And so I sat there for a while longer, experiencing this exquisite, very personal feeling. Well, of course it's personal. I'm the one having it, right? And then what happened is that I started to come up with another question, and it was immediately just, don't worry. Feeling, not a sound. So no more questions, Stinnett. So okay. And I just sat there, and then I don't know if it was 5 minutes, if it was 7 minutes, it felt like there was no time. And what at this church, there were 3 stained glass windows behind the pulpit where the speaker would speak. And it's God is love. And then that started to drift into my awareness. And then suddenly the room started to come back, and Liz was ending her talk. And I started to look around the room, and it was real apparent that no one was on the short bus that I was on. And so I just kept my mouth shut. And, you know, I looked around and I put the chairs away and all that stuff. As I was driving home, I had a feeling that what I had been was kissed, and that it was not a matter of trying to find it again, that I got kind of a real find it again. And then I went to the Alano Club, and there was an old timer there, and the old timer said, yeah, kid, that stuff happens, you know, but we don't talk about it because, you know, we don't want to scare the newcomer. And then I tried to talk to my sponsor about it, and he couldn't hear me. I tried to talk to I was going to the Church of Religious Science at the time, place that I learned a lot of wonderful information. Talked to my friend there, George Bendall, and he said he couldn't hear me. And then I tried to share it once at a meeting, and a guy came, A was a little more active in those days. Guy came across the room and took a swing at me. And this happened at the Manhattan Beach Alano Club with, I won't say with regularity, but at least every 3 or 4 weeks, there'd be some kind of a kerfuffle there. And so what happened was I went to, I searched out my old parish priest, and I found him, and I drove the 4 hours to his place, and I asked him, and he said, well, kid, he said, I wish with all of my heart that this was my story, but it's not. He said, but I've had 4 or 5 parishioners that have been, that have had given me similar reports. So you don't have to worry. It's the real, you don't have to, you're not crazy. It's not drugs. It's not that stuff. And then I pretty much kept my mouth shut about it. For the next 20 years, I pretty much didn't talk about it unless we were in an intimate conversation, or I was leading a retreat on Sunday morning, or speaking at a convention. And then I heard Terry Ritchie, Monsignor Ritchie, talking, and he was using somebody else's experience to talk about it. And it was like, well, I guess I need to tell it occasionally. So I talk about it more frequently now. And, currently my current enthusiasm is I'm writing a book about Bill Wilson's life from 1955 to 1970. And just the varieties of spiritual experience.
Do you think AA has kind of a Goldilocks attitude? Like AA isn't any one sort of voice, right? But there is, some degree of mob rule that goes on, and like where they might look at me and being too far on one side of the spectrum, thinking my understanding of God is it's or I stay sober without God the same way you do because it doesn't exist, or
Right. Yeah.
that point of view is frowned upon, of course. And then you being intimately touched by a spiritual experience, talking about that. Well, no, we don't want that either. It's,
Yeah.
you got to keep it fuzzy in the middle or something.
Well, I don't know if it's, it's an interesting thing, AA is really, really easy to criticize.
Mhm.
Because there isn't a historical contextualization of it. The people that started AA, or the people that were in the Oxford group, they were so overwhelmed by their problem that they would do anything as an experiment. Just they would try it. And so the organic thing that grew out of that is very different than this society that most of the membership now, well, maybe not most of the membership, but probably at least half the membership has been referred to us. I mean, they've been told since they were 12 years old that they're an alcoholic and they got to go to AA or blah, blah, blah. Where with myself, I didn't know anything about it. It was like a secret society. And so when you came in, it was all these people that were talking about stuff that you never heard about. Now it's part of the culture. But so when we look at the Pollyanna-ishness of spirituality, I think that the format of most meetings does not encourage people to honestly share about what happened to them or what is happening to them. I've come to believe that formats are very, very important because they provide a safe place, but a framework with which we'll agree that we're going to share our experience. One of the things I want to thank this group for, this morning I sat down after my meditation and I made a list of the different things that I have done in order to keep at least some sense of the consciousness of that event alive. Because, see, the sudden experience is not sustainable, but the educational is. And AA is a framework to make the transformation sustainable. Whether you're a son of Parkhurst like yourself, or a whack job like me, but I live in Sedona. I spend time in the fifth dimension. I live in the fourth, and I visit the third and entertain people in it. That's my goal. I'm not even woo-woo anymore because I'm non-dual. So I'm just woo.
By the way, if anybody has questions for Jay, let me know. Just write them in the chat. Ask Kaiser or Michael, my co-hosts. We'll get them asked. Otherwise, Jay and I will go on like this until you guys have all gone home and gone to bed. Now, let me see. What did I want to ask when you were talking about that?
Let me add another riff to this.
Yeah.
So what the steps provide us with is a methodology to experience the transformation. Now, I would submit to everybody here that everybody in the fellowships has had a profound, sudden spiritual experience. They're not drinking. There is nothing. I mean, we can talk about my white light or philosophical investigations about whether or not that's schizophrenia or a genuine experience, but this thing of we're not drinking being something that we of and by ourselves could not do until we met the group. And something happened. And it becomes a sustainable, profound awakening because we are not encouraged to replicate Wilson's experience. What we're encouraged to do is to have our own life and experience, but we interpret within a certain language that any society or any group has. And so it's not the Bill Wilson movement, or if it would have been Parkhurst, that would have been that prime. It's not the moral psychology movement, where you got a problem, what you do is go help others, and you have the transformative experience. So the thing is that this is personal. Now, people want to try and say AA is hierarchical, but it's not. And the more you know the people that are at the top of the movement, the more you know that this is not hierarchical. But yet we want to preach against no, AA is anarcho-syndicalism at its finest.
Now, when you tell me this story, I reflect on the fact that I've actually heard this before from people in AA, from people outside of AA, about finding bliss in their sort of Buddhist approaches and just having this experience. It can't be sustained forever, but it is transformative. They're never the same again because they've seen it. They broke on through to the other side. And you tell us about your story, and we hear the Bill Wilson. Now, cynics say the Bill Wilson experience was, an embedded memory from his grandfather or the belladonna treatment, and he was tripping. But I wasn't there, and I'll take his word for it. Right?
Yeah, and by the way, let's get secular about Wilson's experience. He was in Towns Hospital. Now, if you haven't read Charlie Towns' biography that Gary Neidhart wrote, it's fantastic. And this guy was a self-promoter that non-parallel and had incredible influence on drug and alcohol policy in the United States in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. An incredible personality. If he would have for one moment thought that the belladonna or any of the treatments that Wilson got were indeed responsible for the experience that he had, he would have taken out full-page ads in the New York Times. So this idea that somehow, and if you have been unfortunate as I have to try and take a lot of belladonna to try and have an experience, because I tried that. It's a crappy drug, and there was nothing like that that was produced. Now, a friend of mine thinks that it was something that happened from his brain chemistry in delirium tremens, but that doesn't fit with the line, particularly the story. And the thing about his grandfather, again, there are only so many syllables that we have for this. And this is not an extraordinary experience that I had. We make it extraordinary because we marginalize it. But there's a wonderful book called Fingerprints of God that was done by a woman. I can't remember her name. Adele, you might, I know it's on the bookshelf there in the bedroom, but she said that after doing her search and all the stuff, and she was the religion person for NPR back in the 2000s. She said that she believed that every person has this unitive experience at some point in their life. Depending on what culture you're in, it's interpreted in whatever way. And, I've had the privilege of, at that, especially at Santa Monica, I heard, a dozen very compelling talks, 6 of which had a unitive component to it. Now, whether you call it God or not, who gives a rat's? But it was this unitive experience. And this is what we're charged to do, I think, is to provide an environment for every person to have a unitive experience and to validate what their interpretation of their experience is in whatever way. Wilson was very concerned about AA becoming a religion because, once a movement starts, it gets frozen in time. And, we're seeing this incredible pushback to the changing of one word in a preamble that Wilson didn't even write, culturally in AA. Now, the 8 lines that got changed in the 12 and 12 to make them more contemporary, you don't hear anything about. So, it's an interesting thing.
Thank you, Adele. For those of you here, you can find it in the chat. For those of you listening, Fingerprints of God, What Science is Learning About the Brain and Spiritual Experience by Barbara Haggerty, Haggerty. So, if you're thinking of someone for their Christmas list, there's a possible suggestion. Now, this is something I've been struggling with for a few weeks, just sort of tugging and tossing, like, we're supposed to work, and then we get the spiritual experience. If we think of AA in a linear way, it comes closer to the finish line. But Bill Wilson's experience, your experience, it's not like you did it, the work, you earned it. It happened to you.
Right. Well, I'm a big fan of William James. And for anybody here, the book Varieties of Religious Experience, number 1, don't confuse it as being a book. It's a series of lectures. And if you want to read it, don't start at lecture 1. Start at lecture 9, which is where Bill did, which is the the lecture on conversion and then read it from there forward, because it's the personal stories, and it has another one of these white light experiences of an alcoholic in there, who was the guy had founded the Calvary mission that Ebby was at. His father, S.H. Hadley, is the reference in the book. That's how Wilson got it, why they said, here, take a look at this. But anyway, James talks about these two, the sudden and the educational. There's a wonderful talk that Wilson gave. You can find it on xaspeakers.org. Look up Bill W. And it's listed as SPIREX for spiritual experience, SPIREX. And it's Bill talking to some recovering priests in 1966. He talks about the nature of the spiritual experience, and the spiritual experience is the educational variety. It's the one that has legs. It's the way that we move. I mean, I wrote this list. I think I got like 60 things that were very important to me, either different teachers that I was involved with, different activities that I was involved with, and different books that I read to encourage my growing along spiritual lines. This is the educational variety, even though I had a sudden experience. Having a sudden experience doesn't make us, white as snow. You can ask either of my wives. They will tell you he's irredeemable. But what it does do is it gives me a touchstone to fall back upon.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
you can't unremember it.
Exactly. Just as I remember when I fell in love with Adele Shea. It's a memory that I bring up to help inform my current experience.
Awesome. Thanks. John R. has found the Bill talk, and it is also in the chat. This is
great.
Very interactive today. Thanks, John. Yes, this whole, my first experience of reading what we now call Appendix 2, the spiritual experience.
Mm-hmm.
I was asking around to find out, well, who wrote that? Can't be the same guy who wrote the rest of it, because it just seemed like it was a different personality. It was, and what it was thousands of case studies instead of dozens of case studies, and him being further along in his own, educational variety experience, maybe a little less of the self-righteousness of the recently converted at work. But I was actually surprised that the person who wrote the spiritual experience about how, we might have given people the impression that in order to get this AA thing, you need a sudden, religious experience. But, thankfully that if you thought that conclusion is erroneous, most members are of the educational variety. Only our most religious members call it God consciousness. The rest of us see it in another way. I thought, how can that be the same guy who said, God could and would if he were sought? Or
the thing though, Joe, is that this personal experience that Wilson had and the way that he articulated it created a tent that allowed a certain amount of people to get in. And he spent the rest of his life widening the tent. the way that that we explain our experience when we're 4 years sober is completely different. And you would have loved me if you would have run across me in between 1980 and 1992. It was my sober man phase. Armed with steps, concepts, and traditions, able to transcend anything. You have a person with a drinking problem, give them to me. And God, I had a good time. And I helped more people, and the people that I sponsored in those days are still sponsoring people. I mean, the fallout from that, I think, is far more profound than my inclusive spiritual self,
Sober man.
But
well, I'm here to say too, if I had written anything down about what I knew to be true about addiction and recovery at 3.5 or 4.5 years sobriety, and people were still reading it 85 years later, and I could look down from a cloud, I'd get a tinge of embarrassment. I'm sure it wouldn't stand the test of time too well.
Oh, he was appalled at what happened with the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and he said and when he wrote the 12 and 12, he said, I wrote the second book so that they wouldn't because they're treating the first one like Holy Writ. And he says, now they're doing it with the second one. How can I stop them?
And for those of you who are listening and can't see the chat, we have confirmation from Bill C that yes, Jay wasn't being humble, he was insufferable.
Yes.
But I digress. Carry on, sir.
But, so the thing is that what is it that, if what we're talking about is step 3, step 3, I mean, one of my let me fall back, because you just got done quoting Appendix 2. I adopted, when we started a stag meeting in Sedona, we did not call it, we didn't give it a free thinker or a welcome all whack job, umbrella, but we for our reading at your you were sharing with me about your home group's format, we use Appendix 2 as our reading from the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and nobody's exploded yet. I mean, we can all hope that at some time, they'll go Cronenberg and their brains will blow up. But so far it's worked really well. But in step 3, it talks about when it gets done, it says the wording of course was quite optional. Now, when I came into AA, everybody had been exposed to some kind of churching, much of it bad, but they, at least there was some familiarity with prayer as something other than something that you saw in a television show or in a movie that was involved with something that was about to get very dark. And the past 25 years, I can't think of a person that was church that I've sponsored. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I started having people write out their own third step so that they had their prayer in their own words and in their own language. And then I have them write it in their big book. When it comes to step 11, I say pray and meditate the way you drank and used. Just try shit and see where you end up. I mean, I've tried a lot of stuff and I've had a really, really good time. My wife and I have been married for well, no, I don't like to say married. I have been with her for 27 years. And I have to tell you that part of my attraction to her was I believed that she had a spiritual thirst that could hang with mine. And just in the past 4 or 5 months, we got involved in a new spiritual practice, and this is our intimacy. This is how, I mean, I always wanted to have I've had a spiritual playmate, which is a heck of a lot harder to find than something you find in a magazine. And we have been down a lot of different wormholes. And but AA has always been the bedrock of our home, and newcomers have always been, a real central part of our life.
This was something I asked Ward about, and I will fight for my right to do AA my own way, but I will also fight for your right to do AA your own way, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who want, to interpret the big book as instructional. This is how the first 100 members did it. I don't believe that to be true, but if people believe that and it's working for them, I'm totally good with that. I don't object until something becomes weaponized against somebody else's experience of or practice of AA, right? But for every group doing their own thing, some people need structure and direction. Some people, die in that kind of confinement.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to find their own way. But the point was that there were the founders of AA that were pretty entrepreneurial. Well, let's try this. Well, let's try that. Well, what are they doing over in this town? And what are they doing over at that meeting? And Bill Wilson was very much, a creative inventor mind. And then he turns the fellowship over to the fellowship itself, like Henry Ford, instead of finding another enterprising entrepreneur to turn the helm over, he turns it over to the union. And 87 years later, well, we're still making the Model T Ford, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
Followers maybe like authority or direction, or is there something like that going on in AA? And if so, is it?
Oh, but see, the thing is like when Wilson took a look at it, it's a human trait. So we're not, to make it, oh, we'll see what they're doing. No, it's a human trait. It's an organizational trait. I got brought up Episcopalian, and in 1969, the conference of the Episcopal Church changed the Book of Common Prayer. And that fight has been going on ever since in the organization. Because what it was that they were not sensitive to is that grandmothers could no longer, who are the people who fund the church, right, could no longer say the same prayers in the same language with their grandchildren. And this is cultural insensitivity at its highest. Now, I have to tell you that I really thought the conference was an impediment. I don't really think the past 4 years, I think we're moving incredibly. I mean, the fact that the Godward pamphlet got done in 8 months was just, it proved my so there is the ability to change. The 1974, the conference, AA and the National Association of Libraries were the only two groups that that recognized gays and lesbians. So I mean, we're on a cultural our movement has been on the cultural forefront of inclusivity. Now, every time I won't do it today because I think we got a hard stop in 3 minutes, right? So every time I participate now at a meeting, what I do is I read the 12 steps with love inserted wherever God or he is, because I want to be able to show that we can change and still keep intent. And, you know, it doesn't matter what the words are in life. But I want to tell you, I've had the most incredible personal experience the past month. I have been very vociferous about the need to make this language comprehensible to young people and women and the like. My daughter today has 34 hard-won days of sobriety. She came in, she's well educated, but she got a book immediately, started underlining it, has gone to women's book studies where they're going line by line. And she is having the experience that her father, her mother, her stepmother had with this book and this antiquated language. She is finding herself in it in a way that I thought would be an intellectual hurdle. But what happened is that she, like her mother, like her stepmother, and like myself, had a profound bottom that devastated her. That just like William James says, that it is the collapse of the ego at depth that allows whatever this is to come in, and we find either an experience, sudden or educational, where impossible things are possible. We're not drinking.
Awesome. Now, we're not a hard 4 o'clock. This isn't radio.
Okay.
There's a couple of questions that have come up. I'm going to ask Kaiser to ask a question, and then Wendy, if you would like to, you could ask the question directly if you wanted to. But Kaiser, why don't you come on in?
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Jay. Jay, you had said something that was very interesting about the format of AA, by and large, doesn't encourage people to share directly or truthfully. Could you go on about what you've discovered as different formats or different elements of formats that actually do? It seems like the Oxford group had some kind of a format that wasn't necessarily 100% replicated for good reason. What are some good formats? Is it group size? Is it what is
it? Kaiser, there's a couple of things. If I made it sound like people can't share truthfully, please forgive me. I did not mean that. I was talking about the not encouraging risks when speaking about personal experience, personal spiritual experiences, because it's something that's not modeled regularly in meetings.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in much of the country, there's not speaker meetings. In speaker meetings, you have this thing where you get a long telling of the miracle. But and the most important thing about meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and every single one of them, you know, people say, "Oh, is it a good meeting?" You know, Jesus, was it a good bar? You know, they all serve up the juice. I like the way some pour better than others, okay? But I have found that one of the meetings I go to, if you want to talk about kabuki, it's the Roxbury, the Beverly Hills Men's Stag. Okay, now they have the same format that they've had since 1946. And they aren't changing it no matter what. And you wear suits and ties when you're on the panel. There's all this stuff. But when it all boils down to it, the theme of that meeting is that if you get called on to participate, you got 3 to 5 minutes to bring your very best message about recovery from alcoholism. Now, that is a cultural thing. And so, yes, people use their personal experience to describe that, but this is what the message is, find God, work with others, this is get the book, go through it, and do it now. Don't mess around. We had an 11-step group in Manhattan Beach, California, that the format encouraged people to share about their personal experiences. And it was a thing where there was a period of meditation, and this meeting had been going since 1948, and then a reading and reflection, and then calling on members to share. Much different than, well, this is how my day is. See, part of the thing about AA and the Oxford group, every one of our hallowed things is just flat lifted from them. The way the meetings open and close, the only difference really is that with the Oxford group, it wasn't the old timer that'd be the last speaker. It was the one that was newest in, because they were closest to the flame. And that's what we want to warm ourselves by. It's being close to the flame. So like in this men's stag that we started in Sedona, after we do a 3-minute meditation, a person's asked to speak for 5 to 10 minutes on a problem or a challenge that they've had in sobriety, and then call on members to share. This is not, see my new Lexus. This is like, oh, I did it again, or this is what's going on. And then, it's framed within the spiritual solution that we have to offer in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is different than a religious solution. But I hope I answered that okay.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Jay.
Yeah, and Wendy, would you like to come in?
Sure. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jay, for this. Thank you, Adele, for inviting me. My question is, with the people have been sober for a really, really long time and that are set in their ways, how has this new way of engaging in and with AA being received by them?
Well, I think thanks for the softball. I think the cultural thing that we're going through is the fellowship more interested in keeping people with 20 years sober and up comfortable than meeting the new person where they are. It's like any group. One of the fun things about AA is it's one of the few places where you can be old and people still pretend to like you. There's a certain cachet for your time involved. They just don't want to take you in the parking lot and, put a bullet in your head. Well, they may want to, but they don't. A very dear friend of ours once said that there are people that have 30 years of sobriety and there are people that have 1 year of sobriety 30 times. And the difference between, see, the charge in the 12 steps is that we grow along spiritual lines, which means that we should be mutating, we should be opening, we should be trying different stuff. We should be, you know, aware of all the different stuff that's out there and trying it. And there are people that just aren't wired that way. And so the great thing about AA is that it has to be safe for everybody, even the curmudgeons.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one last official, here's Tom with the weather question. I'm just going to say to folks, we have a Facebook group. If you join us there, these shows are reproduced there, but you have to be a member of the private group. If you are listening to us, Google Here's Tom with the Weather if you'd like to be part of our live audience. And if you're new to us, there are Here's Tom with the Weather shows galore, and go to here's Tom with the weather.org, HTWTW.org for more information. Thanks everybody for being with us. It makes it fun. So Jay, what if things go so well for you that money is no object, but Living Sober becomes an international bestseller, and they send you $1 gajillion, and you decide, Del and I are going to spend the rest of our time and our friends on this new yacht, forget the desert. We're going to sail the 7 seas for something different. And you've got your friends, you've got your worldly possessions, you've got this great boat. It doesn't matter what it costs. It's green. It leaves a good footprint. But somewhere around Fiji, you hit a coral reef. The boat's going down. It can't be saved. You get everyone in the lifeboat heading over to this desert island you see to be saved. You've got 1 minute. 1 minute. You're looking at your bookshelf. You've got one baggie. You can take one book with you, which may be the only book you ever have. Can't be the big book.
Oh, it can't be the big book.
Can't be the big book. So what would that book be? Who's it by and why?
Currently, it would be The Imprisoned Splendor by Raynor Johnson.
Can you say that again?
The Imprisoned Splendor by Raynor, Raynor Johnson. It was a book written by a theosophist in Australia who was an astronomer. Very much like Varieties, when you get the book to read it, don't read the first section. The first section would be its scientific explanation of the mystical path. It kind of goes into like a 50s string theory. But the second and third sections are very, very compelling to me. The reason that I say this is one of the 4 books that I know Bill Wilson read and recommended. The other 3 being Varieties, Cosmic Consciousness by Bucky, B-U-C-K-E, and Heaven and Hell by Aldous Huxley. But this book, Bill sent to a few friends who were in trouble. And what Bill said in the letter to a Canadian from Toronto was that, I wish I could spend the 2 or 3 weeks it would take to share with you all the different experiences that I've had that have shown me that the mystical path is indeed real, that my experience in spiritualism is real, that my spiritual experience is real, that this is not, and this book helped inform my core belief. I did a 7-year dive into spiritualism, and I've found it to be as because it was the one aspect of Wilson's experience that I wasn't familiar with, and I would just sit there and go, ew, how icky. And but when I got into it, I found some really compelling people. I've spent time with some of the great mediums of this generation, and have found it to be as valid as any of the other paths that I've gone down. This particular book, what it did is, when I read a section of it, it took my experience back in the Westwood Community Church, where I felt and saw that there was no death. There was shedding of the body, but that the spirit was eternal. And it solidified it somehow into a core operating belief in me. And it's filled with all kinds of fun stories and personal experiences and all that stuff that, using different people and it's just, so I would say that because of that, that would probably be the book that I'd grab. Since it's not real big, I might grab Evelyn Underhill's Practical Mysticism, which is a wonderfully short and compelling instructional in how to have a mystical experience from a scientific point of view.
From a scientific point of view. We don't usually let people have two, but thank you. I'm going to press stop recording now. Some people will stick around, Jay, if you can as well. I see a couple of other questions coming in. Maybe we can do it just
Great. I got 10 minutes that I'd be really privileged. I'm actually at work. Yeah. And I got to run down and do a filming at 2:30.
We will respect your time for sure. Thank you for being part of your song.
Oh, I'll go any place you want, Joe. You know that.